Have you ever believed a mythical creature could be saved by an old woman at the edge of the woods, and come back not once, but twice, to save her in return? In the misty ridges of Blue Ridge, a silent bond was forged. No words, no blood, just 3 stones, a cedar twig, and a red clay cup left on a porch. Few know this truth, but that quiet ritual once turned back a wildfire, carried a broken woman home, and connected 2 worlds never meant to touch. Inspired by Appalachian folklore and based on a real memory from a girl once lost in the woods, this story follows Ruthie Cunningham, 76, who once healed a burned young Bigfoot with nothing but herbs and a guarded heart. 10 years later, he returned, grown, fierce, and silent, to push back fire. Another decade on, he walked beside her, one last time, and now, the girl she once saved carries the ritual forward. If you've ever felt the forest whisper your name, don't let this story slip away. Some promises only echo in the spring. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask to be noticed. Mist clung low across the ridge like a shawl, wetting the old fence posts and muffling the cries of the blue jays who'd woken too early. Ruthie Cunningham stepped out onto her porch with slow, practiced care. Her knees ached from the rain, but she didn't mind. She'd lived too long to pretend her bones weren't part of the weather now. She wrapped her cardigan tighter, the blue one with the wooden buttons, and glanced down the trail that curved past her goat shed and disappeared into the woods. The air smelled like cedar and wood smoke, clean, but restless. Something had changed in the wind overnight. The forest didn't usually call her this way. Not since Robert, not since the fire, not since that winter in '72. She adjusted her bootlaces, filled her red enamel cup with fresh water from the pump, and set it on the porch post like she always did before going near the tree line. Next came the cedar sprig, placed gently above the cup, pointing north. Then 3 flat stones, one on top of the other, careful not to clack them loud. She tapped the porch beam 3 times. Not hard, not soft. Just enough to say, "I'm here, I see you, I mean no harm." Then she stepped off the porch and into the trees. Down by the creek, the mist grew heavier. The trail was soggy and narrow, rimmed with moss and rotting leaves. She had no reason to be out here. Not really. Just a feeling in her chest, like a tug, like something unfinished waiting to be remembered. The stream had overrun its bank during last night's storm. A mess of wet leaves, broken branches, and odd trash littered the clearing. She crouched near a patch of disturbed moss and narrowed her eyes. A crushed can of beef stew, label torn, a singed strip of nylon, backpack strap maybe, and next to it, in the mud, a trail of prints. One deep and wide, pressed heel to toe like a child's oversized foot. The others, smaller, sharp, toes splayed like a possum's, but too long, too heavy. Then she smelled it, burnt hair and wet ash. She turned her head slowly. Behind the stump, curled like a wounded fawn in the thick underbrush, was a creature. Not quite child, not quite beast. Its fur was matted, damp with rain and something darker. A bald patch ran down its calf where skin puckered in a burn. Its chest rose and fell too fast, breath wheezing. Its eyes met hers, and for one long second, the forest fell still. They were wide eyes, black but soft, and glinting not with wildness but with awareness. Fear, yes, but not panic. It didn't cry out, didn't move, just stared. Ruthie felt her throat tighten. She could walk away, report what she saw maybe. Call the station, let some patrol handle it. That would be the proper thing, the rule-following thing. But rules had failed her before. In '72, she'd waited too long. Waited for permission that never came. A mother, bleeding too fast. A child, never born. That mistake had lived in her ever since. In the way she triple-checked locks. In the way she boiled her bandages and wrote every date down in pencil. She pulled her satchel off her shoulder, knelt slowly in the damp, and took out a clean cloth. Comfrey, calendula, little golden bits she'd dried herself last fall. She didn't speak, just moved with hands that had spent 50 years knowing what to do. She didn't touch the creature's skin directly, just pressed the herbs against the burn, wrapped it soft and firm, her fingertips hovering. The thing didn't flinch, just watched. When she was done, she stepped back. Not a word passed between them. It was too weak to walk far. She knew that. Knew it wouldn't survive the night out here. Not soaked, not open to the wind. But to carry it in like a baby. No, that wasn't right. Not for this. She stood up, breathing shallow. "You're not mine," she whispered, "but I'll keep you safe." Back at the house, she opened the old goat shed. Clean straw, a corner dry enough. She swept quick, set down a folded wool blanket from the attic, then returned to the porch. The cup was still there. She refreshed the water, placed a new cedar sprig, this time east-facing. She restacked the 3 stones with care, hands steady. Then tapped the beam again. 1, 2, 3. "I ask permission," she murmured, her voice low and sure. "I mean no harm." The creature didn't resist when she guided it toward the shed. It limped behind her, slow but willing. At the door, it paused. She stepped aside. It went in on its own. That mattered. She didn't lock the door, just placed a cedar bough at its hinge, angled outward. An old symbol, saying, "You may leave when you can." The rain started again that night, soft as breath. Ruthie sat in a rocker with the porch light off, watching the trees shift behind the fog. She didn't feel proud, didn't feel brave, just tired, quiet, the way you do after doing the only thing your conscience would allow. In the dark, she held her tea close and stared at the cup on the post. Red enamel. Flecks chipped away near the rim. Robert's cup. Funny how things held memory. She leaned her head against the frame of the door, rocking slow, her joints aching like truths too long carried. Then, far off, deep, maybe a mile into the woods, there it came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps carried on the wind, almost lost in the rustle of rain on leaves. Almost. She sat up, heart catching in her throat. No lights in the trees, no footsteps, just silence. But she knew that rhythm, that pattern. The way you say I see you, I know you're there. The way you answer back without words. She didn't go inside right away, just sat there rocking, breath fogging the air, wondering if she'd been heard, and if something had spoken back. And maybe, just maybe, it had. The night stayed damp after the storm, clinging to the soil and roof shingles like the memory of something unfinished. Ruthie kept a pot of water simmering on the stove, not for tea, but to keep the air warm, the silence occupied. Out in the goat shed, the creature was still there. She hadn't named it. That felt wrong. You didn't name something wild. You didn't pin it down with a sound that didn't belong to it. But she watched it. Each morning from the porch, through the slat in the door she'd left slightly ajar, she'd find it sitting just as she left it. Alert. Still. Breathing slower now. She kept her movements measured. Everything she did was deliberate. When she entered, she tapped the wooden frame with her knuckles. 3 times, gentle, precise. "I'm here. I see you. I won't harm you." It had become her rhythm, a beat to hold between them like a narrow bridge over deep water. The burn on its leg was healing. She could tell by the way it shifted its weight now, testing the ground when it thought she wasn't looking. She changed the dressing twice a day, using the last of the calendula oil she'd made last summer. She never touched it skin to skin, always through cloth, always slow. Her voice stayed quiet, but not sweet. She wasn't trying to comfort, only to respect. There was something sacred about the way it endured. No whimpering, no begging, just silent consent, like it understood the care came from obligation, not ownership. That mattered to Ruthie. That meant everything. She whittled a cane from pine that week. Nothing fancy, no carvings or polish. Just the right length, light in the hand, a bit of curve at the top for grip. She left it leaning against the inside wall one morning without a word. When she returned at dusk, it was gone from the corner, and the creature was standing. Not fully upright, favoring the good leg, but standing. On its own. That night, for the first time, she didn't dream of blood or snow or screaming voices on the radio that never came. She dreamt of cedar trees swaying in moonlight. No wind, just breath, just rhythm. One afternoon, she set a flat stone in the middle of the shed's straw floor. She didn't explain, just placed it there, solid, unmoving. Over the next days, she saw it start to use it, testing pressure on the wounded leg, shifting stance like someone learning to dance without music. Progress happened slow, like everything in the mountains. But it happened. Then came the storm. It cracked open the sky just after midnight, drenching the porch and howling through the eaves. Ruthie stayed in her rocker, eyes fixed on the distant glow of the shed's lantern. It was faint, flickering, but steady. She must have drifted off, head slumped against the window frame. The nightmare came sudden and cold. A birthing room in a cabin. Winter light through cracked glass. A woman screaming for help, hands soaked in red. Ruthie fumbling for breath, calling on a radio that hissed back nothing but static. A baby slick and too still, her fingers pressing a chest that never rose. The mother's face frozen in that one last glance before the world snapped shut. She jerked awake with her heart pounding, air thick in her chest. Wind rattled the porch rail. Thunder groaned somewhere past the hills. And then, there it was. A sound. Small, barely a scrape. She turned toward the shed. The creature was there, outside, not limping now. Standing upright, holding the pine cane she'd carved. The bandage was loose around its calf, wet from the rain. Its breath came in steady pulls, visible in the cold, like smoke. It didn't make a sound, just met her gaze. The look was not of gratitude, not pity. Something more like recognition. She opened the screen door without thinking, feet bare against the wet boards. The creature didn't approach. It simply lifted the cane in one hand, adjusted its grip, and took a step. Slow, controlled, as if to say, "Look, see, I can." Ruthie covered her mouth. Something cracked inside her, old and rusted loose. She nodded once, slow, as if approving something deeper than emotion. They stood like that until the rain softened to mist. Then, without warning, the creature turned and walked. Out of the yard, past the fence, down the trail toward the trees. No hesitation, no backward glance. It vanished into the undergrowth the way a shadow melts at dawn. She didn't follow. Didn't call, just watched the place where the fog swallowed him whole. The next morning the shed was empty. The pine cane leaned neatly against the wall, straw undisturbed except for one small circle flattened where it had rested. Ruthie stepped inside, heart tight and tired. She touched the cane once, then left it there. On the porch, the red enamel cup still sat on the post, water half full. The cedar sprig dry but holding shape. She reached for it to replace it but stopped. Something had been placed beside it, curled like ribbon, a thin strip of birch bark, spiraled, white-gray, clean as paper. She picked it up with both hands. It wasn't heavy, but it was everything. She looked out toward the trees. Wind stirred the leaves, and sunlight broke through in fractured bands. A mourning dove cooed from the chimney top, low and slow like a lullaby with no words. She placed the birch strip on the windowsill inside, above her sink. She didn't speak to anyone about what she'd seen. She didn't write it down. But that day, she pulled out her field kit again, refreshed the herb pouches, cleaned the scissors, re-rolled the linen, and just before sunset, she walked to the far edge of the garden and cleared a space. Laid a smooth stone in the grass, right where light hit it through the trees. She didn't explain, she just did it. The world had shifted, not loudly, not fast, but completely. It started with a smell. Not smoke, not at first. Something sharper, drier, like old pine needles crushed beneath boots. Like the air pulling tight, waiting to break. Ruthie stood on the back step with her hand on the porch rail. The wind had shifted sometime in the night. That was the first sign. It used to blow in from the west this time of year, cool and mossy off the ridge. Now it came from the southeast, hot and biting, like something pushing instead of drifting. She knew that kind of wind, and she knew what followed it. By mid-morning, the haze had swallowed the far tree line. Sunlight bled orange across the hills. Somewhere down in the valley, a siren moaned once, then cut off. Ruthie didn't need the radio to tell her. There was fire in the woods. She moved faster than her bones liked. Closed the shutters on the north side. Laid wet towels under the door gaps. Filled every pot and kettle in the kitchen. She dragged the old rug from the closet and soaked it in the bathtub, then rolled it across the inside of the front door like a shield. The house creaked under the weight of heat that hadn't even touched it yet. Still, she didn't leave. They'd told folks to evacuate the lower valley by nightfall. Bobby Crane had knocked around noon, face flushed and voice tight. He'd offered to help her pack, even pulled halfway up the gravel with his truck idling. But she'd sent him off with a jar of pickled beets and a promise she had everything she needed. That wasn't the truth. What she had wasn't what she needed. What she had was what she couldn't leave. She folded Robert's flannel shirt and placed it in the cedar box by the door. On top of it, their wedding photo, creased at the corners, but clear. Two people younger than time, arms hooked like they had everything figured out. She closed the lid with both palms and sat back for a moment, watching the curtain over the sink ripple even though the window was shut tight. When she stepped outside, the heat punched her straight in the chest. The sun had gone dull, smeared behind layers of ash and haze. Ash clung to the leaves like frost, gray and silent. Her boots kicked up puffs of powder with every step. She filled the red enamel cup with fresh water from the jug, walked it to the porch post, and set it down. Cedar sprig. 3 stones, 3 knocks, she whispered. I'm still here. The air answered with silence. Then the wind shifted again. Harder, faster. The trees down by the creek bent like men in prayer. And over the next rise, flames appeared. Not high at first, low, crawling, testing. But they moved quick, latching onto dead brush, jumping split logs and fallen branches. The fire didn't roar. It hissed, like it was alive and angry. Ruthie grabbed the metal bucket from the porch, filled it at the rain barrel, and sloshed it in a ring around the foundation. Then again, and again. The water soaked into the dry soil too fast, but she didn't stop. The fire came slower here, too slow for her to feel safe, too fast to outrun. She'd built this house with Robert, layer by layer, beam by beam. Every groove in the wood was a memory she wasn't ready to let burn. She didn't notice him at first. The smoke had grown too thick, her eyes watering from the sting. But then a shape moved at the top of the ridge. Broad, upright, stepping carefully. Not rushed, deliberate. It was him, Calder. He looked different now. Taller, shoulders square and wide. The wildness of youth hardened into something like purpose. He was dragging something behind him, a full green tree, limbs still full, bark fresh and wet. He planted it down near the side slope, then another and another, laying them against the hillside like a barrier. Fresh wood wouldn't burn as quick. That much she knew. But what he did next stopped her breath. He stomped through the leaves, flattened them with heavy, sure feet, cleared a wide arc along the tree line. Then he dropped to his knees, scooped dry dirt with both hands, and flung it over glowing embers. His arms moved like shovels, swift and sure. Every patch he cleared widened the gap between fire and cabin. He clawed a fire break into the earth, bare-handed. At the edge of the line, a familiar blackened ring caught Ruthie's eye. Charcoal from an old campfire, probably his, from when he was still small, still hiding. She watched him stamp it out, heel grinding deep into the ash. And then the fire slowed. It hit the green trees and paused, caught the scent of wet bark and faltered. The dirt break stole its breath. Wind carried sparks in wild patterns, but none stuck. The flames licked, swirled, then shifted away. The air broke open like a lung gasping. Ruthie fell to her knees. The smoke thinned just enough to see his silhouette through it. He was turned sideways now, facing the ridge, body braced like a guard dog watching for the next wave. A shaft of light slipped through the haze, and for a brief second, she saw it. The burn scar, low on his calf, pale against the dark fur, a memory still written on his skin. She didn't speak, didn't dare. She just watched as he stood still for a long, quiet moment, then walked back the way he'd come. Not toward her, not into the clearing, just gone. She sat there until the sky darkened, until the last of the orange glow faded behind the trees. The air smelled like wet leaves and scorched pine. The worst had passed, but the weight hadn't lifted. Inside the cabin, she poured water over her hands and scrubbed away soot until her skin burned. Then she set the cedar box back under the bed. She didn't light a candle, just sat in the dim, breathing deep. The next morning, when she stepped onto the porch, the air was clean and hollow, like a bell that had just stopped ringing. Birds had returned, cautiously. A squirrel darted past the fence post. She turned toward the enamel cup, expecting to refill the water and replace the cedar like she always did. But she stopped. The 3 stones she'd left the night before, small, smooth, carefully balanced, were no longer there. In their place stood 3 larger stones, flat, heavy, rounded from the river but too wide for her to lift. They were stacked upright, not on top of each other, but side by side, standing tall like sentries. She stepped closer, heart ticking faster now. Each one had been marked. Faint lines carved into the stone, circles, crosses, a swirl like smoke. Not written words, not symbols, she knew, but intentional. Meant. She reached out and touched the middle stone, warm from the sun. A breeze stirred the cedar branches above her. Light flickered across the porch. Then a scent rolled in, not fire, not ash. Birch. Fresh, sweet, familiar. She closed her eyes. This time she didn't need to hear the knocks. She knew they were already echoing. Somewhere deeper in the trees. The ground had softened from the rain, slick in places where the roots curled just beneath the surface. Ruthie should have turned back before the creek bend. She knew better than to press too far this early after a storm, but her mind was restless, the kind of hum that didn't settle with tea or rocking chairs. She had gone looking for nothing in particular, only to stretch her legs, to feel the edge of solitude sharpen against the weight of her thoughts. Her boot slid sideways before she felt it coming. She caught herself for half a second on a crooked branch, but her knee buckled, and then the world pitched. She landed hard. Mud smeared her sleeve and hip. Her breath jolted out on impact, and she knew before she moved that something was wrong in her leg. Not shattered, just wrong. The deep ache that makes you curse your own aging bones. She lay still for a moment. Listened. No wind, no birds. Just the slow gurgle of the stream nearby, and the press of pain curling up from her shin. Her fingers pressed around the calf, up to the knee. Nothing moved that shouldn't, but the angle was off. Maybe a crack, maybe a sprain. Either way, it would mean a crawl back. She sat up, breathing through her teeth, and began to gather what she could. A broken branch to splint. 2 strips of cloth from the hem of her shirt. Her hands moved like memory, like habit. Tight, but not too tight. Enough to keep the bone still. She reached for another branch to use as a crutch, tested its strength. Too heavy. Tried again, then came the sound. A pause in the air, a shift in weight somewhere behind her. She didn't look right away, just sat there, straightening her back, waiting, not afraid, just aware. The kind of awareness that ran deeper than nerves. When she turned her head, he was there. Called her, no longer a memory, no longer a question. Just there, full and quiet. His eyes met hers, not soft this time, but steady. Not the gaze of something wild, something different, present. He stepped forward, slow and sure, and set something down on the moss between them. A branch, not random. Clean, stripped, tapered at the end. The handle smoothed by hand. The wood was pine, but not freshly cut. It had been held, carried, prepared. She took it without a word. Her hand closed around it, light but firm. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer to help her up. He just stood there as she pressed the stick into the earth, grit her teeth, and pushed herself upright. Pain flared white behind her eyes, but she swallowed it down. She stood, weight lopsided, leaning heavy on the pine. She took a breath and nodded once toward him. Not thank you, not help me, just, I'm still here. They walked. Not together, not quite apart. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He paced just far enough to one side that his bulk shielded her from the breeze. His stride matched hers exactly. When she paused, he paused. When she faltered, he turned his head slightly but never reached. It was the strangest form of grace she'd ever known. The creek crossed twice beneath old log bridges. The trail turned slick again near the bend, and her breath hitched when her foot caught on a root. But she caught herself on the cane, his cane now, and didn't fall. When they reached the cabin clearing, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. Long shadows stretched across the porch. Her legs trembled. Her fingers tingled from holding too tight too long. She stepped onto the first board and turned toward him. He stood at the base of the steps, not moving. She leaned forward and tapped the porch beam. 3 times. Her voice cracked just slightly. Thank you, she said, then softer, as if saying it to the wind. Son of the forest. He didn't nod, didn't blink, but she felt the weight of it, that moment. And then he turned and disappeared back into the trees. She stayed on the porch a little longer, waiting until the ache in her legs subsided enough for her to trust herself upright. Then she stepped inside, peeled off her wet socks, and wrapped her knee tight with a fresh cloth soaked in vinegar and mullein. When she stepped back out, something caught her eye near the post. Beside the red enamel cup, hers was another. Same shape, same curve of rim, but older, duller. Stained along the bottom edge, but clean. It hadn't been there that morning. She would have noticed. It was placed with care, opposite hers, like a mirror, like a reply. She reached out, touched the rim. Still damp from the mist. Her throat tightened. She sat down on the porch swing, one hand wrapped around her cup, the other resting on the second. The breeze picked up, light and cool, and something in her chest finally gave way. Not pain, not sadness, recognition. Later that night, when the porch light flickered and the sky went slate black, she noticed something else. Above the window, nailed onto the cedar beam, was a small ring of twisted branches, crude, unfinished, bark still clinging in patches, a circle more or less. Cedar, by the smell. She hadn't heard it placed, hadn't seen a shadow pass. But there it was. She leaned forward in her rocker, eyes never leaving the shape. That kind of gift wasn't random. That was a sign, not of friendship, not exactly, but of something deeper, a bond that wasn't about debt or duty, but knowing. She rocked back, the floor creaking beneath her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in her own silence. The forest didn't just breathe around her. It watched, and waited, and answered. The storm had been creeping in since afternoon, the kind that didn't announce itself with thunder, but with a hush. The wind shifting strange, the birds going quiet, even the goats pressing up against the side of their pen like they knew something Ruthie didn't. She lit the stove early, put on a pot of water for tea she hadn't planned to drink. and folded her shawl over the back of the chair closest to the fire. The cabin felt smaller that evening, the walls softer, more porous. Maybe it was just her bones aching again, or maybe it was something else. Some evenings felt like they were holding their breath. This one did. The knock came just after dusk, not the 3 soft raps from the woods she had come to recognize. This was different, faster, unsteady, from the front, human. When she opened the door, the rain hit her face like breathless warning. A girl stood there, drenched, shivering, cheeks red from cold and wind. Barely a teenager. She clutched something to her chest, bundled in a soaked flannel, her knuckles white from holding it so tight. "I didn't know where else to go," the girl said, voice small and cracking. "He's hurt. I didn't mean to. He needs help." Ruthie didn't speak. She didn't need to. She looked at the girl, freckles, wet strands of hair stuck to her cheeks, boots 2 sizes too big, and then at what she held. A young raccoon, its hind leg bent unnaturally, eyes wide, dazed, and mouth twitching from pain. A snare wire still wrapped around its foot. Ruthie didn't hesitate. She stepped aside. The girl didn't wait for another word. She crossed the threshold, dripping water onto the wood floor as she went straight to the hearth. The raccoon let out a weak sound but didn't struggle. Ruthie followed, shutting the door gently behind them. She tapped the frame 3 times. "I'm here, I see you, I mean no harm." The girl didn't seem to notice, but something in the air did. Inside, Ruthie moved like muscle memory. She grabbed a towel from the hook, handed it over. The girl took it, pressing it to her shoulders, not speaking. They laid the raccoon on the old braided rug near the stove. Ruthie fetched her shears, a bottle of warm water, and a small jar of calendula salve. She didn't need to ask where the trap had been. The wire was tight, biting into skin and fur. The leg looked worse than it was. Bloody, yes, but not shattered. As Ruthie worked, the girl knelt nearby, holding the animal's front paw between her fingers. "What's his name?" Ruthie asked softly, not looking up. The girl blinked. I don't know. I just found him like that." Ruthie nodded once. That was enough. She cut the wire, slow and steady, careful not to startle it. Then she cleaned the wound, wrapped the leg with a strip of soft wool, the edge of the girl's own sleeve, torn without hesitation. The warmth of the cabin soaked into the room. Time slowed. "He's been following me," the girl whispered suddenly. "Since last week, just in the woods near our house. I thought he was just curious. But I think maybe he was in trouble. Maybe he wanted help." Ruthie didn't answer. She didn't have to. They sat in silence for a while. The raccoon slept, curled into a nest of towel and breath. The rain grew heavier outside. Lightning flashed, not loud, but close. "I got lost," the girl said. "I ran after him, and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know anyone lived this far out." "You found me," Ruthie said simply. The girl finally looked at her, really looked, and her face softened. "My name's Lydia." Ruthie nodded. "Ruthie." Lydia looked back at the fire, her lips trembling slightly. "Thank you." The kettle hissed behind them. Ruthie poured 2 cups of tea, earthy and hot, and handed one over. Lydia wrapped both hands around it, letting the steam rise into her face. "Your hands are steady," Ruthie said after a moment. "The way you held him, that matters." Lydia looked down at her fingers. "My grandma taught me to crochet, said gentle fingers are good for knots." Ruthie smiled faintly, then stood and crossed the room. From a basket by the hearth, she pulled out a half-used ball of gray wool. She laid it on the table without a word. Lydia didn't move toward it, but her eyes held on it longer than she meant to. Morning came too fast. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and quiet. Mist still curled along the base of the trees, and the roof dripped steadily into the puddles below. A truck engine hummed in the distance, then a frantic voice. Ruthie stepped outside to wave them down. Bobby and Marla Crane ran up the path like the earth had opened behind them. Marla reached Lydia first, wrapping her arms around the girl so tight she nearly lifted her off the floor. Bobby just stood, hand over his mouth, shaking his head. "We thought, Jesus, we thought," Marla whispered, tears streaking her already soaked cheeks. Lydia didn't cry. She just held on. Ruthie watched from the porch, silent. She didn't interrupt. She knew the weight of reunions. She'd witnessed them before. And the ones that never came. Eventually, Lydia turned. Her eyes found Ruthie's across the space, and something passed between them. Wordless, but lasting. Before she left, Lydia walked back into the cabin, crossed the room, and picked up the ball of wool. She placed it on the table. "You should keep it," Ruthie said. Lydia shook her head. "You'll need it again," she said. "For someone else." Ruthie didn't answer. She just nodded. The raccoon had curled into the towel again, breathing slow. It would live. It would walk again. Lydia stood on the porch steps, the woods behind her still and watching. She turned once more to Ruthie, hesitated. Then she hugged her, tight, small arms around an old woman's shoulders. No words, just warmth. And then she stepped back. From the trees, not far but deep, came a sound. 3 knocks. Not loud, not near, but not imagined. Lydia turned toward it, eyes wide, breath caught. Ruthie didn't move. "You heard that too," the girl whispered. Ruthie's voice was low. "Yes." Lydia didn't ask what it meant. She just listened. The moment stretched, held in the hush of pine and dew and something older. Then Bobby called her name, and the world resumed. Ruthie stood on the porch long after they'd gone. The red cup sat on the post. The cedar sprig was damp from mist. The wool sat quiet on the table, beside a bowl of salve and a folded square of linen. Outside, the air felt changed, and somewhere in the woods, someone else was listening. The days grew thinner, like parchment pulled against light. Ruthie moved slower now, not from pain, but from the weight of things she hadn't yet written down. She felt it in the space between footsteps, in the way morning light pressed through the east window like a reminder. Time doesn't pause for the willing. The little cedar box sat open on the table by the window. She hadn't touched it in weeks. Not since Lydia. Not since that sound from the woods had stopped being something strange and become something familiar. But now, her hands knew what to do. She placed the red enamel cup inside first. The one Robert used for coffee. The one she'd used for offerings at the porch. The chip on the lip still caught light when it turned. Then came the strip of birch bark, the one curled like a question mark, left behind that first season. Calder vanished. She brushed her thumb across the grain, feeling its memory. Next came the circle of cedar, sloppily braided, the strands dried and brittle but still whole. It had hung above the porch for months now, unnoticed by most. To her, it had always been enough. The sign that something remembered, that she was seen. And then the hardest part. She reached for the notebook. It wasn't thick, only half full, its pages worn soft from turning. The cover was canvas, fraying slightly at the corners. Inside, her handwriting had started to shake near the bottom edges, but each line was clear, intentional. She had recorded everything, the rituals, the meanings, the signs. Not superstitions, not folklore, just understanding. The order of things. How to place the cup, which side the cedar should face depending on season. The stones, why it must always be 3. How the rhythm mattered more than the strength. The line about food being forbidden. How offerings should never carry human need. No sugar, no meat, no bribes, just water. Pure and quiet. She wrote it like you'd teach a child not to scare a deer, like you'd explain thunder to someone who's never seen lightning. She set the notebook in the box last, its spine resting against the enamel rim. She left the lid open. Outside, the wind carried the dry rasp of pine needles and the faint whistle of something gliding through high branches. The season was shifting again. Fall would come soon, with its wet leaves and long shadows. But tonight, the air was still. She poured water into the cup on the post. The cedar was fresh. The 3 stones had not moved. Her joints ached from the climb up the ridge that morning. She'd walked farther than she should have, but it was important. To see the clearing again, to press her palm against the firebreak line where the earth still wore the shape of his hands. The bark had grown back where it once charred. Life didn't just return, it adapted. Later that afternoon, she found the letter in the mailbox. No return address, just her name, written in a hand not yet grown into itself. Inside was a short note, pencil, smudged but legible. Dear Miss Ruthie, I've been thinking about what you said. About listening. I think I want to learn how. Is that okay? There was no signature. Just a drawing of 3 stones, one flat, one round, one slightly cracked. Ruthie folded the paper and placed it under the cedar box lid, then closed it gently. That night, she sat by the window as wind stirred the edge of the porch. The cabin was dark except for the lamp by her elbow. Moths tapped softly against the glass. Her tea had gone cold. She was drifting toward sleep when she heard it. Not a knock. Not from the porch. Just a rustle. Soft, intimate. She turned her head slowly. The cedar sprig had been replaced. Not dropped, not broken. Braided. Fresh. Green. Damp at the ends like it had been pulled moments ago. And beside the cup, another item. A small knot of grass. Twisted tight like a child's attempt at rope. Tucked in like a keepsake. She touched it with 2 fingers. It was warm. The room didn't feel empty. She didn't call out. She didn't reach for the light. She simply tapped the window frame. 3 times. The wind quieted, and for a moment, the shadows felt soft, like they leaned in just to listen. Somewhere in the woods, something waited. But not for her. Not anymore. She reached again for the box. Her hand paused over the lid. Not to add, not to take away, just to feel the grain. Like she might remember what it meant to hand over a burden without fear it would be dropped. The wind changed again near midnight, and with it, the knowing settled deeper in her chest. That soon she would no longer be the one to answer. And that was not a sorrow. It was the closing of a circle. A breath finally let go. The morning she didn't wake, the window was open just an inch, letting in the early air, cool and full of pine. Light touched the edge of her quilt, spilled across the cedar floor, quiet and gold, like it knew not to rush her. A breeze shifted the lace curtain just enough to lift one corner, like a breath. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the red enamel cup by the sill. Her other was folded on her chest, fingers curled inward, soft and still. The cabin didn't make a sound, as if the walls themselves were listening. They found her around noon. Bobby had stopped by to drop off firewood. She hadn't answered his knock, and the door was unlocked. She never left it unlocked, but nothing was out of place. The tea kettle still sat on the stove, half full. Her boots were lined neatly by the porch. On the table, the cedar box was closed. The air inside smelled faintly of dried mint and old smoke. He stepped outside, removed his cap, and called quietly for Marla. She came walking up the trail with Lydia, who had returned the night before for the long weekend. They stood on the porch a while. No one said the word. They didn't have to. The funeral was quiet. Just a dozen or so from the mountain ridge. Folks who knew her name or knew someone who once owed her a kindness. The service was held beside the small grave where Robert had rested for nearly 3 decades. The soil there was soft, dark, and familiar. No one brought speeches, just silence, a folded prayer, a basket of herbs placed beside the headstone. Her initials were carved into a wooden plank, RMC, burned with a hot iron and sanded smooth. Bobby placed it in the ground with both hands. It wasn't the only mark on the board. A large footprint had been etched beside the initials. Not detailed, not obvious, just the shape. Like a pattern. Like decoration, if anyone asked. But those who knew, they knew. Some say the red enamel cup stayed full for weeks after. That it never emptied. Not even when the rains came and washed the steps clean. Others claimed the cedar sprig on the porch rail never browned, that it stayed green even as October rolled in and the frost took everything else. No one ever saw anything. But the store clerk down in town said the stones outside Ruthie's gate kept changing. Not disappearing, just moving. Each week, a different shape. 3, always. But never quite the same. Some said it was wind. Some said teenagers. But Lydia knew better. She found the cedar box 2 days after the burial. It was right where Ruthie had left it, on the floor near the window, the light pooling beside it. The latch was undone, but the contents untouched. She opened the lid slowly. Inside, she found the notebook, the circle of cedar, the birch bark, the cup. She lifted each one like memory. The notebook she opened with both hands, letting it fall to a page marked by a dried grass strand. The writing was still clear, even where the ink had faded. She read slowly, aloud to herself. How to place the stones, how to listen, what not to bring, what not to expect. She sat on the floor and wept for the first time since. It wasn't loud, just the kind that folds you in and keeps you still. That evening she walked the path toward the porch, the notebook clutched to her chest, the grass knot tucked into her pocket. She poured clean water from the kitchen jug into the red cup, placed it gently on the post. She slid a cedar sprig behind the rim, angled slightly to the west. 3 stones from the creek bed, just the right size. She lined them on the step, and then she raised her hand. 3 knocks. Solid, sure, not calling out, just acknowledging. I'm here. I see you. I will not harm. The porch creaked once behind her, but no one stepped forward. She waited, not for reply, just for the moment to settle. Then she sat down on the swing, watched the woods, listened, let the air fold around her. In town, folks talked less and less about the old cabin up the ridge. It was still there, but different now, a little more distant, even if it hadn't moved an inch. Kids whispered stories about it on bus rides. Parents laughed them off, but didn't go near. And yet every few weeks, someone walking the lower trail swore they saw fresh water in the cup. New cedar, stones rearranged, no footprints, just quiet signs of something still watching, still present, but not waiting anymore. When Lydia visited the grave again that winter, she found the ground swept clear of snow. The board was still there, the initials still dark. The footprint hadn't faded. There were no candles, no flowers, but the silence held something deep. Not grief, not absence, just understanding. That what needed to be kept had been kept, and what needed to continue would. The morning came pale and breathless, with frost clinging to the edge of every cedar needle and the hush of late spring holding in the branches like a prayer half-spoken. The trail was still there, but smaller now, grown in as if the woods were slowly trying to reclaim what it once allowed. The air was clean, sharp, and full of the smell of damp earth and new green. Lydia stood at the edge of the clearing, boots planted, breath steady. Her coat brushed her knees, sleeves too long, hands buried in wool. She'd grown taller, not just in years. In bearing, she didn't look back. In her pack was the old red enamel cup, wrapped in flannel. The same one Ruthie had left behind. The same one Lydia had polished twice this week with a cloth dipped in vinegar and salt, like the book said. She carried the cedar sprig fresh cut from a low branch behind her house. Her father had asked her why that one. She didn't answer. Some things weren't picked. They were understood. The notebook had aged since she'd found it. Corners dog-eared, the spine soft, the ink almost feathering. But the instructions were there. Simple, clean, repetitive, like music made of memory. She knelt by the old porch post, though the cabin had long since fallen into shadow. The roof sloped now with moss, and the door leaned heavy on its frame. But the stones were still here. A new set every few months. Never flashy, never loud. Always 3. Lydia placed her cup gently on the post. The bottom rang faint against the wood. She poured clean water, no bubbles, no added anything. Just water. She laid the cedar sprig behind the rim, not tucked, not forced. Let it rest where it leaned, like she'd seen Ruthie do. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the soft braid of yarn. The last strand from that old gray skein Ruthie had used to bind the raccoon's leg years ago. Lydia had kept it. She'd unspooled it last night and wove a new braid with strands of her own hair laced through. Something old, something living. She placed it at the base of the post where the stones had once been. Then she picked up 3 new ones, smooth, dark, river-worn, and stacked them by feel, not for balance, for message. She stood, brushed her hands against her legs, and stepped back. 3 knocks. 1 against the beam, 1 on her thigh, 1 against her heart. I'm here, I see you, I mean no harm. She waited, but not with expectation. The sun hadn't quite lifted above the ridge. The sky held that soft gold stretch that feels more like breath than light. Between 2 birch trunks ahead, just deep enough into the woods that the shape became suggestion, stood something tall, still, present. It didn't move, didn't approach. Its outline bled into the mist like memory refusing to vanish. She didn't call out, didn't wave, didn't step forward. Instead, she reached into her coat one last time, pulled out the birch bark she'd carried for 2 years now, curled and faded, but whole, and placed it beside the yarn. The woods shifted, not loud, not even audible, but the way wind pulls differently around things that listen. She didn't look up again. She didn't need to. She turned, boots cracking lightly through frost-covered moss, and walked back the way she came, not because she was afraid, but because she understood. There are things you do not chase, things that remain only if they are not pursued. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she glanced once over her shoulder. The cup caught the light. The cedar held. The stones hadn't moved, but the braid, hers, was gone. She smiled, lips closed, the way Ruthie used to when words would only get in the way. Each year after, someone would walk that trail again and find the post still standing. The cup always full, the cedar always fresh. The stones never repeated. No one ever spoke of it out loud. But there were whispers. Kids said if you walked by in late spring, you'd see footprints, not pressed into mud, not worn by shoes, just patterns, shapes, sometimes too large, sometimes perfectly still. Sometimes none at all, but always 3 knocks, not from behind, from somewhere ahead, faint, measured, like an echo from the ground itself. They weren't warning. They weren't invitation. They were reminder of the kind of bond that doesn't fade with time, just deepens. The porch no longer creaked. The wood had grayed to silver, but the air still held a rhythm, a language that didn't belong to pages or names or fences, just ritual and memory. And the steady patience of the woods. Some stories don't end with answers. They end with echoes. And in the quiet after, when the final knock fades into the hush of the trees, what's left behind isn't noise or spectacle, but presence. A sense that something passed through, left a mark, and trusted us enough to let it remain. This wasn't a story about proving what's real. It was a story about recognizing what matters, about what happens when we choose to listen. Not with judgment, but with gentleness. Sometimes all it takes is a pause, a stillness, a willingness to believe that not everything has to be seen to be true. At the heart of it all is a simple truth we forget in the rush of the world. Connection doesn't need to speak loudly. Sometimes it whispers in water poured with care. Sometimes it lives in a pattern of stones, or the sound of a hand tapping 3 times in the dark, soft, steady, full of meaning. What we carry forward isn't the weight of loss. It's the warmth of what was given, the quiet mercy, the patience to understand without asking for explanation, the courage to hold space for someone or something different from ourselves. And maybe that's the point, that we're not here to tame every mystery, but to stand beside it, to witness, to offer kindness, even when we don't fully understand what's looking back at us. So if this story touched you, even just a little, if it stirred something you thought was long asleep, or reminded you of a silence that once felt sacred? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what this story meant to you. Because sometimes the most powerful echoes come not from the forest, but from the heart still willing to respond. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, where wonder meets memory and where mystery is met with compassion, make sure to subscribe and follow the channel. Your voice matters, and we're listening, always.